thing. I'm going to try to stay to the right of screen, but if I do get in the way of the left slide, let me know. All right, so just a quick show of hands. I'd like to gauge my audience. So I'm going to kind of just ask some general questions. Do we have marketers? Okay, a few of those. Developer, technology, okay, business owners. Okay, great. So generally, this is a technical talk, but not a lot of code. We're going to try to keep it pretty high level, conceptual. I wanted to get through a lot of stuff, but I do provide a lot of resources, links, etc. So you can always dig this stuff up if I go too fast. Please wait for questions at the end. I will provide space and time to do that. And on that note, let's get started. So thank you for coming to WordPress as the hub of your digital experience. We'll be talking about Alexa, voice services, a little bit about machine learning, some cloud technologies that are really cool. Basically kind of the momentum as the internet takes its next evolution and what you need to do to get prepared. And some of the things that take it beyond being a content management system like we saw in the late to mid 2000s. So today what we're going to learn about, we're going to learn this new buzzy marketing phrase called digital experience platform and why that matters. What digital multi-channel means as opposed to unified channel such as just having a web browser. We're going to talk about WordPress as a content hub that can power the rest of your digital devices and integrate with large parts of your business, not just being responsible for your website or your mobile experiences. We'll talk a few about just some ideas that I have where I think there's market opportunities, maybe some places for future project and ideas for the entrepreneurial crowd. And then I'll give a bunch of resources and then we'll leave some time for questions. So I'm Stephen Word. I am the WordPress Innovation Program Manager at WP Engine. I know that's a mouthful. I've had a couple of roles here at WP Engine. My first job, I was hired to come in as a dedicated core contributor. So I gave 100% of my time through sponsorship at WP Engine, working back on the WordPress core project. After that, I split my time about 50% and worked on platform code to bring my WordPress knowledge to the hosting business. And then very recently, I've joined the marketing department where I work with partners, vendors, kind of act as an internal consultant. I work with sales, our R&D department, our account managers, partnerships and agency teams. I wear a lot of hats, but it's been very cool and that afforded me the opportunity to come and hang out with you guys. I'm a feeds component maintainer for the WordPress project, which sounds like an old technology, but it's actually still very well alive. Covers anything in structured XML. Basically, it's one of the mechanisms, not as popular as JSON these days, for taking information out. We'll demo one of those through the Poly project that I'll bring up later. I have agency experience before this and also freelance for about 7 years. That's where I met my good friend Mike. And then just a couple of fun facts. I like to create instrumental hip hop in my spare times. If anybody wants my SoundCloud, I'd love to talk to you about that. I like hiking, which is very difficult to do in Texas, Miss California. And craft beer, really love it. Deschutes Fresh Squeezed. It's #1 at the moment. All right. Oops. All right. So the first thing that I want to do is talk about this new generation. We all know Gen X, Gen Y, the baby boomers, etc. At WP Engine, we did a research study recently with a partner of ours to learn about more about what the younger generation is going to do in the future and how this is going to impact WordPress and how this is going to affect our business. So who are we talking about? So Gen Z, they were born 1996 and present, so they're anywhere from about 22 and younger. They have a very online first approach to the internet. A lot of them basically are not offline for any significant amount of time. This is kind of a shift. Myself grew up before the internet was really available. Still remember riding my bike to school and etc. And then the career took me to where I'm online all the time now too. But it's really, really important. As of right now, they're about 25% of the population, represent about $40 billion in buying power. By 2022, both those numbers are going to double. So it's very important to pay attention to what they want because these are your consumers of the future. So by the numbers, so just some statistics about this generation. About 48% say they want a guaranteed authentication for everything they do. And what we're talking about here is they're not interested in fake reviews. If they read a restaurant review, they want to know that that's accurate and not being gamed or something like that. Personalization is becoming increasingly important. They want experiences that are catered to them, not a one-size-fits-all, which is what we kind of see historically in the WordPress world. There's not a lot of personalization out there right now, but it's coming. So I definitely pay attention to that stuff. A large percent of them, almost more than a majority, never goes more than 8 hours without being online. And the most interesting one to me, I think, is they view the internet as a source of entertainment. Twitch, YouTube, educational software, etc. Netflix, these all tie into this. It's not just a source of information and news like you see in some of the other generations. It's definitely one of the ways that they consume their entertainment value throughout the day. So just a quick comparison between the baby boomer generation and Gen Z. So 72% of boomers generate or depend on the internet for information solely. This is your news sites, podcasts, etc. Whereas Gen Z, once again, back to entertainment. This is where they spend a lot of their hours. 30% can go 2 days on the internet for the older generation. 22% usually doesn't last more than an hour or so. If any of you have kids, maybe you've seen this. Intermittent internet usage and high expectations for security and privacy. This contrasts the new generation where they're actually willing to give up personal information about themselves for a better experience. Not that they don't want that to be secure, but it's definitely a shift. So more of an emphasis on personalization. And let's get to why this is all important. So this is kind of an evolution of the internet for the last 3 decades. We're not going to spend too much time on what I call the dark ages. I think most of us looking around were there. But yeah, terminals, no GUIs, you got your snap bracelets and whatnot. In the 90s, we started seeing a shift, right? You now have tactile interfaces that you can use to interact with. You get Windows for the first time away from DOS. So now you're getting the visual representation of the screen. However, everything was still kind of cumbersome and slow. You still got to have lots of cords. And there's also an economic divide. Getting on the internet was kind of expensive at this time. As we entered 2000s, this is where WordPress shows up. Web browsers start leaving the portals. People are getting away from CompuServe, Prodigy, AOL, and you're starting to get databases and proper HTML. CSS comes along in this time period. Touch interfaces like smartphones, etc., start showing up at this time. And then general content management. This is where the very beginning of, how would I say that? The beginning of getting information online and it becoming a content repository. That really didn't show up until 2000s. And you also get faster 3G connections and Wi-Fi. And then this brings us to present day. And this is where things really shift and why I brought up the whole Gen Z thing. People are accessing the internet in natural ways now. Mobile surpassed browser views a few years back. We're now starting to get things like, mobile watches, you get push notifications. Everything is getting smart. You're getting smart watches, smart cars, smart homes, voice assistants. Machine learning has finally matured to a point where it can do predictive analysis on things and actually could know more about you than you know about yourself. It's a little bit creepy for some of us, but there's also some really cool stuff. And lastly, virtual reality and augmented reality are actually becoming viable. I don't know if anybody ever tried to do virtual reality 10, 20 years ago. It was awful. Same thing with text-to-speech and voice. Also very cumbersome, very crude. And all of that's changing. It's not all there yet. A lot of these are emerging technologies. But the shift is happening and it's happening very rapidly. One of the things that I will be focusing on in this talk today is voice for 2 reasons. One, I think it's the first technology that's actually going to hit. And 2, I've been working for the last 6 months on a voice project, and that's what you get. So what do we mean by digital experience? If you actually go back to that last slide, this is what I call the digital experience decade. But what does that actually mean? Is anybody familiar with Gartner? Yeah? Okay. So big marketing agency, they do a lot of market research, a lot of Fortune 500s depend on them. They qualify businesses, what market segments they end up, etc. And this is where we're seeing the shift in WordPress. So WordPress has always fit in the left side of the panel here with a focus on secure content management, basically as a data store, Browsers and mobile devices are typically been the two big consumers of this, with a focus on information. Gartner defines this the process controlling the content consumed over more digital channels through the use of specific management tools on a core repository. Digital experiences are a little bit different than that. They still have all the components of a content management system, but it's heavily focused on integrations. Personalization is a really, really big emerging market that nobody has nailed yet. Things are multi-channel, meaning that you have a connection to all of these devices. You can use a centralized content store and push to podcasts. You can push to mobile devices through notifications. You can create podcast. You can populate in games. If you connect something to a store, you could have like virtual reality in-game purchases, things like this. But you can do that all with the centralized hub. So it's all about integrations. It's taking your MarTech stack, connecting HubSpot and Salesforce, if you're in the marketing world, to your WordPress content. Voice and voice assistants, being able to natively interact with the website as opposed to it just coming in you, being told at you. You'll start to see more interactions to where, for example, you ask for a recipe, it could get, directions. Smart homes, Internet of Things is also becoming more and more popular. There's a lot of cool devices out there, side projects with things like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis, or those little like dash buttons that Amazon has out. You can now have events to control your Nest thermostat from your website, or even things like how many outbound orders do I need to ship today? Things like that. So voice. I said this is one that's very dear to me at the moment. I also think it's the closest technology that's actually functional today. And it will be everywhere. There's a couple of different personas that can use this, and I don't have them all listed here. But one of them is multitasking, being able to take your eyes off the screen and do something else, and still being able to ingest web content. Or being able to take content on the road with you, whether that be through your mobile phone device when you're jogging, perhaps you're on a commute. And then you also have the voice assistants, Google Home Assistant, Siri, what they call Apple. Anybody know the name of the Apple one? That's one. And then Alexa, of course, which is probably the one most people are familiar with. Voice is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And one of the reasons for that, it's a far more natural way to interact with the web. If you think about the 1990s where, you're using the keyboard and the mouse, the keyboard was actually designed to slow people down to keep typewriters from jamming back in the 1950s, because people were typing were going at a rate that was too fast for an optimized keyboard. Those things are very cumbersome and not a very natural way to go. Voice interactions, people can typically talk about 4 times faster than they can read or type. And that's pretty incredible. Things like hands-free text messaging, things along this nature, much more bandwidth, far more optimized with a voice experience. About 20% of all voice mobile devices and searches will be based off voice technologies by the end of 2019. That comes from a Gartner study. And they also say that 25% of customer operations will be voice-based. Things like AI bots, I know that we all hate those on the phone when you get you call into Comcast or whatever and you have to push the button to say one. But those technologies are getting a lot better and can actually provide a lot better experiences with the information that you're looking for, unburden support teams, but also deliver better support experiences. And then lastly, I think I actually mixed my facts there. 50% of all searches by 2020, that comes from ComScore. I think that we're already starting to see this. It's not near 50% yet. I think it's probably in the 20s somewhere. That's a change that we're going to see. It's not going. So the first example that I would like to talk about, this is a project that was a partnership with WP Engine. I promise this is not a WP Engine plug talk. Not going to try to sell anything, so just be aware of that, or aware of that. So this is natural text-to-speech for WordPress. Now, there's another product that Amazon released in 2016 at reInvent called Polly. Polly is a service that does natural language processing, but it's only API driven. There's not really an easy way or a low barrier of entry for non-technical developers to get access to the Polly stack. You would have to hire somebody or work with an agency or partnership of some sort to get access to these things. I think Amazon realized this and kind of serendipitously, AWS is one of our infrastructure providers, and we had a team up in Seattle having a chat with them, and they bumped into the Amazon Polly team in the hallway, and they pitched the idea, and our team was like, why don't we bring this to WordPress? And one of the things that's really amazing about that is WordPress has about 30% of the total internet market share, right? Just under 1 in 3 websites on the web today is WordPress powered, and that's the top 1 million. Not even all the blogs that are dead out there; those don't even get counted. So what this plugin does is it basically utilizes that Poly API and allows you to take text that you've either written historically or text that you will write in the future and transcribe that into natural audio. It comes with 27 languages. Well, the languages are actually less because a lot of them are dialects. For example, English has like 5 different ones. You have Welsh and British and UK English, etc. But it does have a lot of French ones, such as Portuguese, Russian, Japanese, I think Icelandic's even in there. So really cool stuff there. And it's multi-channel. This plugin actually will take the content that you render and create a series of RSS feeds out of it based on taxonomies or category information. So if you were building a WordPress site and you wanted to have a podcast very specific to one category, you could take your RSS feed and then later submit that to iTunes. And then you can interact with it through voice assistants, TuneIn Radio. You can download, Apple will do that on the phone natively through iTunes. You can also, if you have an Android device, get something like TuneIn or any of the popular podcast aggregators. Will allow you to take the content of your website, take it with you in the car, hit play when you're on a jog. There's also an accessibility angle here. So one of the things that WordPress puts a lot of emphasis on is democratizing publishing on the web. That has always been one of the core tenets of WordPress, and this is very much in line with that. Screen readers, while they are very, very utilitarian and great, they don't really have that natural language feel. So this is a step in that direction towards making the experience better for people that maybe can't see or hear as well as some other people. And then I would like to take a minute to, actually I'm going to demo this, but before we get there, so back to Poly use cases, just things, some of them are very natural, like navigation. That's something that we kind of use already through things like directions from Google Maps. You can also do it to like voice audio books. You could have automatic announcements. I know that the Amazon team was telling me they have an emergency system. There was a city, and forgive me which one, where they basically their entire technology infrastructure went down, and they had to do like EMS updates during the time post a tsunami. They were actually able to use the service to automate those and then send those out to people. Gaming has another place. So when you're rapid prototyping games and you want to get the voice of the character to mimic the speech patterns, a lot of times game designers will use something like Poly. Google has a version of this as well. This is also not AWS promotion. To rapid prototype the game so that they can get a feel for how the game flows before they send it off to get it made by human actors. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk through Poly. I do have to jump out of full screen to do this. We're going to bounce around a little bit, so bear with me. All right, so this is a simple demo site that I set up. There's a couple of different ways that Poly can be used. In its most basic form, I'm going to hit play here, and it's just going to voice the article down below. And I believe that we're using one of the English male voices right now. Just keep in mind that there's a lot of derivatives here, and we'll go through a couple of them. But just pay attention to how it doesn't sound as robotic as a lot of the text-to-speech services you may be more familiar with. Oh, no. Well, all right. Apologies.
February 4th, 2018, WP Engine, the world's leading WordPress digital experience platform, announced today a $250 million investment from Silver Lake.
So things to pay attention to here is the speech breaks. After commas, there will be a pause. It also knows the difference between live and live, so it has contextual understanding. It knows how to pause. It knows how to say like 75,000, or if you have a percent sign in certain contexts. For example, a dollar sign on its own will be rendered differently than a dollar sign next to numbers. It would know that that was currency, for example. You can also do things like add speech emphasis. Not in the actual WordPress version that will be coming soon. The Poly service does support that. You can also wrap things like, for example, if you wanted to have a quote, you could voice that in a different voice than you would the main body. Things like whispers are supported, etc. So let's scroll down and find kind of a cooler example here. I don't know how everybody's Cyrillic in Russian is, but I think this one's kind of cool. So hello, have a beautiful day. Same thing in Japanese. Okay. Very cool. All right. And then really quick, I don't want to focus on this too much, but this is an example of the RSS feed that's basically pulling in the MP3s in a context that is understood by iTunes. So if you took this URL, then you can submit it to iTunes. It takes a couple days for approval. But after that, then you can get a podcast of your website's content. And like I said earlier, it can become as granular. Anything in WordPress that has an archive. So you can make it date-based, author-based, custom taxonomies, which is like custom tax classifications, by category, etc.
Sorry, real quick. Heat or sirens? Because if I close the windows, it's going to get really hot. Can everyone do with sirens? All right, yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's not bothering me if it's not bothering you guys.
Just want to check the room. Thanks.
So when we launched this back in January, we launched this with one of our customers, Political EU. The main objective here was we had a speaking engagement that we're going to be doing midsummer in Europe. So we were trying to find a partner that was in the UK. And their use case at the time is they have a newsletter, or a couple of newsletters that they send out on a daily basis every morning for people to adjust while they're drinking their coffee or eating their donuts or whatever they do. One of the things that they discovered, though, is this was very kind of limiting, because generally when people are getting ready for work, they're very busy, they're not at their computers, they're about to go jump in the subway or in the car, etc. So what they've done is they took these two newsletters. One of them is the Brussels Playbook. And as you can see, very similar to the demo that we saw a minute ago, you can basically just render
Brussels Playbook.
the speech here. And now you can step away, go make your coffee, etc. And let's go over to iTunes really quick. So this is just the iTunes application that's native to OS X. But like I said, all of these would also be accessible through your phone or tablets or other devices. And yeah, this is an example of a podcast created using these. So now when they send out their newsletters every day, they also have a subscribe to iTunes button, so you can adjust it on the go. And just really quickly, let's dig into the back end of that. So we can just show you basically how easy it is to get started with this. So you only need two things. You need a WordPress site and you need an AWS account. The AWS account is only for credentials. There is a small monetary investment, but there is a free tier that will give you 5 million characters for free within the first 12 months. To put that into perspective, your average 2,000 word article comes out to about a penny after that. It's 4 cents per million characters after that, but they do give you a year with it. So you could take a site that probably has a couple hundred articles and get away for about $10. It is pay for render, not per listen. So after the content is produced and transcribed, the fee is over unless you update the content. For example, if you change the text, you add a period or something like that, the audio obviously has to be re-rendered because it is representative of your text content. But if it's historical content, then that's not something you have to deal with. In my testing, yeah, it's all been very, very affordable. And to get the other media channel, in this case podcast, pretty low barrier to entry. If you really think about it, you know, you're not paying for a different version of your site. What you're paying for would be to get people ingesting your content that were historically not ingesting it, right? People that were driving a car were not looking at your website anyway. So this opens the market to a whole new audience. So once you populate the credentials, you have a couple options. The AWS region will store S3 bucket, which is Amazon's simple storage solution. You can control things like speech rates. So this is audio quality. You can add breaths in between phrases to give it a more natural feel. And then you have the option of whether you want to enable the player at all. So those are not coupled. You can have the podcast or you can have the player inline in the content. One or the other, or neither if you like. You can actually just take the MP3 artifacts that come out of this. You own those at that point, so you can take those and embed them elsewhere. One of the things that was really important to us was to make sure that this thing was going to scale, especially with a launch partner like Politico. I had concerns in the initial stage that if we tried to stream this with high concurrency off our platform, because we were optimized for WordPress, not for audio or video streaming, that we wanted to make sure that it would stand up. So using things like S3 allows that to get distributed along the cloud, and if you need a step beyond that, you can also integrate with CDNs, Mac CDN or Amazon's CloudFront, and then you can have extremely high concurrency, meaning like thousands and thousands of users at once. This section here is just some iTunes specific stuff. You can add, these are fields that are required for iTunes, so you need to have site owner email, an icon. They do make you pick a vertical section so they can classify it in iTunes. It's kind of limiting, but you know, a lot of it goes into news or politics or entertainment or something like that. And then lastly, there's a bulk update feature. This will allow you to process all of your old content. And it does, it will do an estimate. One of the things we realized was if you're trying to look at all the articles to figure out how many characters it is, that can actually slow things down quite a bit. So we do take a slice. But if you read this paragraph here, if you do check the plugin out, it'll give you a pretty good estimate on what pricing is. So this one was 13 articles, 20 cents. I'm not going to hit the bulk update button, but anything like that. You also have the ability to do individual voices on a per article basis. So those settings we were just looking at were basically global settings. Everything will be inherited by default, but there are overrides, which is how I was able to do the Russian and the Japanese demo. If I did bulk update, that would overwrite those. But it's pretty simple. Basically just go in, here are your poly settings, anything you type in the box on update, and then you will get an audio file, and it's super snappy, just to give you an idea about that. So right now, the text is being sent off to AWS, it's coming back, there's now an MP3 file local to the file system you can use. So I think that pretty much covers Amazon Poly, and moving on. Okay, this is the slide that I'm most worried about because the authors of this particular project are sitting over here in the corner, and I'm pretty sure they showed up to heckle me and maybe to protect that I didn't get it wrong. So VoiceWP. VoiceWP is a plugin that allows you to create Amazon skills. I know that Tom has given a presentation at this meetup before on the subject. And so out of respect, I'm not going to get into that too terribly much. I'm sure he did a better job, but make sure you check that out. But it allows you to create things like, Alexa especially has built-in features. So flash news briefing, news, etc. It allows you to take your WordPress content and be able to query Alexa. So you can do things like, Alexa, give me news from People Magazine or something, and Alexa to respond. It has been rumored, it's more than rumored. So one of the things that's really cool about this so Poly has very natural standing voices. VoiceWP in its current version, version 1, sends a JSON blob or structured text off to Alexa, and when you request the skills of the briefing, you have two options. You can either play an audio file, such as a human spoken MP3, or Alexa has the ability to change that into Alexa's voice and she will read it back to you. I believe, I don't want to put a due date on you, but very, very soon, Tom and I have been working together, and this project here will consume poly voices so you can get that more natural language through the Alexa skills. This is also completely free as well, Tom, right? Perfect. Yeah, this is a very, very cool project. I recommend checking it out. I did have a demo through this website called echosim.io, which is like an Alexa in a browser. It has worked for me every single day until this morning. So unfortunately, I cannot demo that. But actually, I am going to just show you kind of what it looks like, just so you get an idea. This is a pretty cool dev resource, so if you are playing with these skills and you don't have an Echo yourself, you can check this out. We'll try it, but I'm not expecting. Alexa, what time is it? All right, thanks, Alexa. All right, you will see beta is written, yeah, right there. Yeah, so the two of those together are going to be very, very powerful if you want to turn your website into speech. I recommend checking out both of those. Google also has Voice Assistant and some APIs that were announced very recently. They also have a natural speech project. I have not had a chance to check it out yet, but if you are not interested in the AWS ecosystem, there are other players. Just be aware of that. And then the last one in the voice world, this one is called Spoken Word. This comes from friends at XWP. Much like Ali Interactive, they are a WordPress-focused agency. I would call them a boutique agency, meaning that they're very focused and do high-quality work. This is a project that is very dear to their CTO's heart. And what it does is it actually takes the text-to-speech synthesis engine that is native to your local system, and it requires a Chrome extension, so you do have to have browser support, but it will do basically like read-alongs, and we'll demonstrate that here in a moment. It also works offline because it's all local to your system, so unlike the other two, you don't have to have outbound requests going to the cloud. This one is more of an accessibility play. We've also been talking with them. I would like to have all of three of these projects integrated together. I think that would kind of be an all-in-one solution, so keep your eyes open for that. What's really cool about this one is you can play, fast forward, rewind, etc. So let's check that out really quick. Now this one isn't in a WordPress context. Unfortunately, I did not have a whole lot of time to get the demo prepared, but it is very cool. So you get these controls here.
You.
Sobre mi animal favorito.
Oh, yeah, I'm in the way there.
Great creature.
Este.
Animal.
Me gusta mucho.
Bison super interesting it was.
Grandes.
Are.
Right, and then you can also fast
They
forward,
read two of the two.
Este animal
Of the two. They read.
pause, etc. Another very, very cool technology. The focus here is a little bit different, but if accessibility is important to you, this might be a very good place to start. That's all done through a markup called speech marks. If you'd like to learn more about that, that would be your buzz phrase, and I think I have a link to that also at the end of the presentation. Okay, chatbots. This is one that I'm sure that a lot of people have seen before, but probably have never seen in the context of WordPress. What these are is, anybody ever been to a website and you get the little pop-up box? It's got like a smiling picture of somebody's face, and you chat with them, and then it's your job to figure out if they're a human being or not, and if they're trying to sell you something or not. There's a couple of technologies that have really come a long way. One comes from Google. I believe it was an acquisition. Don't quote me on that. It is basically an interface for defining the rules for the way that these automated chat interactions would work. You can get a free account through Dialogflow. I was playing around with it last week. It's very cool. You go in, you enter sentiments, responses, facts, things like that. And one of the beautiful things about it is it does have machine learning behind it, so it gets better with time. An alternative to this project, and it has language support for 20 plus languages as well. And that's a Google product. Amazon has something very, very similar called Amazon Lex. They've invested heavily in this in the last year. It's easy to use, built integrations for all the AWS stuff, and it's also in line with a lot of AWS things, pretty low barrier entry from a cost perspective. I will share a link to this deck at the end. All these learn more links, I would suggest doing a little bit of follow-up reading on that if any particular thing that we talk about is interesting to you. And then back to WordPress. This is a plugin that is using Dialogflow to create basically one of these chat interfaces. It is also a free plugin. I have a demo for you here that I'm about to show. That cost me $0 to get set up. I think that at scale you will have some cost, but I cannot speak to that specifically. But it allows you to create your own branded chatbot. So if you're in an industry that has a lot of support requests, and a lot of those requests are generally along the same lines, such as what are your hours, or do you serve wine, this could be beneficial to you there. And it's actually pretty snappy. So let's move on to a demo of that. All right, so this is just a WordPress site that I spun up a couple days ago. Went and created my Flow account, and now I have a virtual assistant down in the bottom. One of the things that's really cool about this is they do have what they call like small chat, so you don't have to define a lot of the rules at the beginning. It can basically do things like hi, how are you, and what time is it, etc. So, can you guys read that? Okay. If you cannot read it, I typed in hello. It responded with good day. Let me tell you a joke. I asked it how it was. It says I'm doing very well, thanks. And now I'm going to say, tell me a joke. And this is where I get scared because some of the jokes are either not funny or just weird. So I don't know what it's going to come back with. A bus is a vehicle that runs twice as fast when you are after it as when you are in it. Tell me another joke. Despite the cost of living, have you noticed how popular it remains? That's kind of funny. Yeah, so like I said, you can use these, not just for telling jokes and whatnot. There's some real business applications here, but you do have to go through and train the models. We'll talk more about machine learning here in a few slides, but I thought this was a pretty cool concept. Nobody's reading my speaker notes at the bottom. All right, Internet of Things. So this is probably the one that I think is the most emerging at the moment and doesn't have as many practical applications that I could really speak to. Anybody is free to chime in here if you, hey, how's it going? Anybody is welcome to chime in if you know of something. I'd be happy to add this to the slides. I do have a couple of examples, but they're mostly fun projects. So basically, Internet of Things. A large amount of what we're talking about today is powered from the REST API. The REST API is structured JSON. It takes the content of your website and allows interactions both directions. You can do things like publish through an API, or you can also get information back out. We're going to talk mostly about getting it back out, and then I'll talk about this funky contraption in the picture there. One of the things that I would recommend checking out just to kind of get started in this space, If This Then That, people familiar with that? It's a very, very cool tool that allows you to take all your smart devices and apply a rule set for them. So for example, when the sun goes down, lower my air conditioning. Or when I arrive at home based on a geo signal on my phone, turn on the lights and set them to 50%. When it gets to be 10 o'clock, turn the lights off. Things like this. There's a particular skill that will allow you to work with the REST API called Maker. It does take a little bit of setup, but the results are pretty cool. One of the community members that is also an automatician, does a lot of cool stuff, named George Stefanis. Has had a couple of really, really cool talks. You can find those on WordPress TV. There will also be a link right here if you click on this. But one of the examples that he talked about was a notification light that will tell you when your business has an order to ship. So you just sold a product on WooCommerce. You could have a light in your shipment room telling you that you need to go to the post office or how many orders are fulfilled, things like that. Side project I worked on this is just a fun one, Raspberry Pis. They're really cheap, like $30 computers. And since I was doing WordPress core work a lot, I basically had a little LCD on it, and anytime somebody made a new commit, it would like give the description of that commit, the title, and then like set off a bunch of lights. So when new things hit core, you could get notified. Oh, really? That's cool. Mike was saying that they use those for 911 alerts at Penske Media, in LA. This thing at the top is actually an Internet of Things device. So as a joke, at WP Engine we do hackathons twice a year, which is basically just a bunch of nerdy people getting in a room and having fun. So since we've been talking about the digital experience, this is our analog experience machine. So everything that is mapped here does something with the WordPress site. I can't remember exactly what they all do. Things like comment approval. You can't actually see it, but there's a toilet handle here on the side that flushes the cache, which I think is my personal favorite. And you can change the themes. You can launch from staging to production. There's really no practical use for this. It's just fun, but it gives you an example of what's possible. And I really wish I could remember what the fire alarm did. I think that might be like revert production back to staging or to its last revision or something like that. That was an oops we need to bail. All right, machine learning. This is a technology that has been around for a long time, but through cloud computing and cheap resources, it's now become a lot more powerful. Machine learning is basically training a computer model based off of tons and tons and tons of data. This is how Facebook makes predictive things about what you may like. And as you like button things, it gets better at knowing who you are. There's a lot of similarities. One of the main mechanisms for machine learning is something called a neural net, and it's modeled after the human brain. The idea is that different things in your brain are connected through synapses, so pathways, to different nodes. And the general idea is that when something meets the model, the pathway gets reinforced. So the next time that question comes up, it'll take that path over a preferred one. And there are a lot of cool services that we'll also mention here in a moment to kind of help you get started with that. This is a really cool space. So let's get into it. Before we do that, just to kind of give you an idea of the different types of services that are powered by machine learning that Google has available. Cloud translation. So I don't know if anybody's ever been on vacation and used Google Translate. It also has a really cool feature where you can take a picture of something in a language and it will actually re-render the image in another language, keeping the style, font, and colors all the same. First time I saw that, it like completely blew my mind. Cloud Vision, which is a image API. Natural language is very similar to the Poly service. Cloud Speech is very similar to the Poly service. Cloud Video Intelligence, these are things that do like video analysis. It can get sentiment, judging what a video is about. So like, for example, it can also do transcriptions. So for example, if you're trying to subtitle a video track or something, this could probably get you a lot of the way there. And then Dialogflow was the chatbot technology. You can also do things like connect this with Twilio, so that you could have natural language through things like phone calls, push notifications, text messaging. It doesn't have to be limited to the browser. A couple of WordPress plugins, they're in the space. This is an area at WordPress specifically. One of the things that I love about it is I do think that it trails the greater market by about 1.5 years to 2. For anybody that has the ability to create things, if you're a maker, it means that basically ideas are already proven, but they haven't hit the WordPress space yet. So if you have the ability, the time, and the money, you stand to make a lot of money, which is kind of cool. But this is a product that uses machine learning called WordLift. It's an SEO tool. It will do things like provide content suggestions, like, hey, you're writing something, maybe you've used this word or this category or this tag. Our machine learning algorithms have proven that people are more respondent to it. It also does a lot of typical SEO things, like schema markup improvements, etc., making your structured data. A lot of SEO is based around how the search engines are able to index it. So this will help beef that up. And then if you don't have images, a lot of themes these days require like a featured thumbnail. You can give suggestions for, hey, this article is obviously about cats. Here's a cat picture that you might like. It is, yeah. So, WordLift. Brunify. Now, this is probably the one that I think is the coolest, but it has not been maintained. It's also potentially the most creepy. So this is event tracking based on WordPress, or WordPress events. So for example, if you were to go visit multiple categories, it would keep track of those, and now it would know that you were interested in the cat category. And now you could tailor related posts or things like that. It also works cross-site, meaning that if you own 2 properties, I can learn something about you on one, and the first time that you visit the other site, it will already know and be able to give you a personalized experience. This goes back down to the Gen Z stuff we were talking about, personalization being very, very important. A lot of the younger people expect to have that type of experience, and that's only going to become more so. It helps content producers also understand where they're being successful and when they're not being successful. I think that we're going to see a lot more of this thing, even though this one has been sunset for the most part. But the idea is very cool. I had a very similar idea a couple years ago, which I think I'm going to try to go after. So I'm not going to share intimate details about that. But yeah, I think that's like $1 billion market if anybody can pull it off. after the deadline. So Jetpack, automatic plugin, very popular. This one's a little gray on whether it's machine learning or not, but it does things like spell check and contextual suggestions. So it kind of helps you improve your writing style. Something to check out. And yeah, things like cliches or biased languages, styling and grammatical errors. It's a pretty good proofreading tool. Worth checking out. Virtual reality and gaming. Now, this is one that people probably have a hard time reconciling how WordPress has anything to do with this. Like, why in the world would you have anything to do with VR and WordPress? This one is also very experimental at the moment. Fortunately, I happen to work with one of the guys that's been playing in this space a lot. A coworker of mine named Anthony Burchell. It's basically using REST endpoints and feeding them into a Unity game engine. So Unity is an open source game engine. It allows people to make 3D games. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and click to the demo there. There is a GitHub link here. It is open source if anybody wants to check this out more. It's a pretty compelling project. Let's go ahead and... Okay, so this is the WordPress site. Now, this could actually not be public. This is using WordPress as a content store. It's not actually meant to be human readable. It could be, or user visited, so to speak. But basically, these are just your traditional posts. And then these images here are actually 360 images, meaning that you can like spin around in full panorama. So in his particular demo, which you saw here, actually, I'm just going to like, if you kind of pay attention to the pictures here, this one's Berlin, Martian surface, and then like a picture about Anthony. If you go back to, you can see that basically you're able to view this content. This is very much a proof of concept more than something that would be directly usable in its form. But what's cool about this is imagine that you had a game and you had already sold it. You could then update the content, add new levels or experiences even after the publishing date. Something that could be super compelling here would be something like in-game purchasing. So imagine that you had something like this connected to an online store. Pay models in video games, especially mobile gaming, is very popular right now. Let's say that you were on, I don't know, like a first-person shooter game, walk around, shoot 'em up, and you wanted to buy a new pistol or something. You could actually sell that as a digital good through WooCommerce, and then have an in-game thing where you could take a controller, reach it behind your back to make the purchase, and now you have the weapon of choice. So this one, like I said, is very infantile, but I think has some really, really strong possibilities. You're looking at this on a Vive right now. So just some emerging marketing opportunities that I think that we'll see. Yeah, content personalization, we've touched on all these before, but I do think that back to my point about opportunities that exist, they do exist. A lot of these do right now, especially the ones that don't have plugins, and even the ones that do have plugins can always be improved. I think that people stand to do a lot of really cool things in the next few years here. So these are just some ideas that I came up with, but based on all of this stuff, you could, the sky's kind of the limit if you can dream it. It's becoming much more possible to build it. So content personalization, take the Brenify example, right? We've all seen related posts before. And one thing that's really challenging from a development point of view is computing related posts has always been very, very computer intensive and not terribly good. If you could know more about your individual user, rather than saying these 3 articles are related to that particular piece of content, you could say, wow, we see that you liked this content, you stayed on the page for a while. Here's 3 other things that you might have. Especially in media vertical space, this is very advantageous. Anybody who's running ad slots on their websites will know that the number of impressions, the longer you can keep people on the site, the better. So therefore, the more engaging you can make a website, also the better. Things like personalized content will keep your users more engaged, keep them on the site longer, and eventually end up in more revenue. We talked about in-game purchases. That doesn't necessarily have to be through virtuality. You could do that through mobile gaming or even text gaming if you terribly wanted. Just to reiterate, this is all coming through REST API endpoints. So the consumer of the content isn't necessarily terribly important. It's client agnostic, meaning it can be consumed by anyone.
Hey, real quick, Stephen, can you explain what REST is?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that happened in WordPress a couple years ago is that it added an API. which is application programmer interface. It's a way for machines to talk back and forth with each other. So whereas you and I, we would go to a website through our web browser, you can now have two different systems communicating back and forth, and the REST API is the mechanism for doing this. So for example, if there was a purchase made in WooCommerce, that would send a request to the WordPress site over the REST API and authenticate it so it's secure and say, hey, this user of this game needs to make this purchase. The REST API endpoint would consume that, WordPress would do its thing, and then it would send back a response to the game knowing that the purchase had gone through. One of the things that REST API is used most commonly now is called headless WordPress, which also goes to the Content Hub. This is using WordPress only as a data store, leaving the front end up to other more modern things like React, Vue, Angular sites. Mobile applications leverage this a lot. It really opens up the doors for being more creative on the front end without having to be jailed by the WordPress theme experience. And then there is a middle ground. You can use a lot of those technologies in the WordPress themes. That's called headless WordPress, which is basically just using the WordPress REST API to pull content out of WordPress and then present it somewhere else. That could be on the same server or it could be somewhere else. But did that clarify? Is everybody pretty good on that? Okay. Yeah, recommended product engines. This is something that could be done through, I didn't actually talk about Deep Lens yet. That's also a really, really compelling idea. So Amazon has a new service they announced this year. It's a little set-top box, a computer with a camera on it, and it does video recognition or image recognition. Anybody ever watch Silicon Valley? Any fans in here? You know the hot dog, not hot dog scenario? That is one of the examples that comes out of the box. Apparently it works pretty amazing. But more importantly, you could target people wearing red shirts or something in billboards. It's like, oh, wow, somebody just walked by and they're wearing a red shirt and a black hat. Maybe I could sell them more red shirts and black hats. I know that we're all creeped out by that idea. Nobody wants targeted ads, but I think we'll all get more comfortable with it as time goes on. There's, if you are interested in the Deep Lens, it works very similar to the dialog flow that we talked earlier. So you sign into the service, you assign a set of rules, you have to do training data, but once you do, it evolves over time through machine learning and gets better. The more pictures of cats it gets, the better it becomes at identifying cats. That is not quite released yet, but keep an eye on it and check out the reInvent talk from 2017 on Deep Lens. It was probably one of the cooler things that I saw. These are just basically kind of an overview of the things that we talked about. AppResser. Didn't talk about that too much. AppResser is a really cool way to take a WordPress site and convert it into a native mobile application.
That's a good example.
Yeah, perfect example of a headless solution. And the founder happens to be in the room. Brian, Yep. TechCrunch is a very popular tech magazine. Is also running a headless browser solution. If you just kind of want to get a feel for what WordPress looks when it's only powering the back end, TechCrunch is a really good place to start. Voice assistants. Yeah, we went through them. Just to reiterate, Amazon Poly for WordPress, Voice WP from our friends at Alley Interactive, Spoken Word, which was the read along, and then Echoism.io, which was the Alexa thing that didn't work in browser Alexa testing. Tommy, do you have any better suggestions for testing that, or just get a device? Get a device. Okay. Okay. So Spoken Tool CLI. Very cool. Thanks, Tom. Internet of Things. Another one I didn't talk about. George Stefanis, who did the WooCommerce order fulfillment thing, also made a WordPress badge that he demoed at WordCamp US this past year. You can find links to that on WordPress TV. That's another one that's just really fun, but based on actions during his talk, he would light up and do different things. Once again, not super practical, just fun. But you could imagine that you have a button, like one of those dash buttons, and every time you press it, it could flush the cache, or that's probably a bad example. But yeah, you can interact with your WordPress site, moderate comments, do things like that, all with never having to touch the computer. The chatbots, just go back over those. So Amazon Alexa, Twilio, which again was the SMS and voice. And these things all integrate together. There's a really cool GitHub repo that connects Amazon Lex and Twilio together, which will give you the ability to have spoken auto dialers and things like that. I believe Madison Square Gardens does a lot with that sort of thing, so that if you were trying to book an event or something, you can SMS them, ask them what events they have available, and then they will respond with, we have whoever it is live at the Garden at 7 and 45 tickets available. My chatbot was the plugin that is powered by Dialogflow, and then just some really cool machine learning things. Simply typing in like Google machine learning or Amazon machine learning or Microsoft machine learning will give you a quick overview of all the different services they have. There are so many I could not cover them all. And then Brennify was the personalization one, which I really, really would like to see somebody actually knock out of the park. Content suggestions, and then the deep lens. That one's probably a little far out because it does require people to have the hardware to support that, but I could totally see it being on the billboards or in storefronts, things like that. When you're in the subway tunnel and they have the billboard. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one of the cooler advertisement campaigns I ever saw was for Vidal Sassoon. And it was a picture of a woman with her hair, and every time that the subway came in, it would know through a motion sense, and her hair would blow in the wind until the subway stopped, and then she would just go back to it. It was really, really cool. So things like that. And then VR and gaming. Definitely check out VR WordPress. Also, the next slide that I show up is going to have some interesting links to this stuff. But I totally see that as being another avenue. The encapsulating idea here is WordPress on the front end is fairly limited. But WordPress, the thing that it does better than anything else, as far as competitors, better than Drupal or any of the major content management systems out there, is just simply managing content, right? It has the editorial flows, user management's great. This is why it's winning. It's not winning because it is written the best from a theming and templating, or that it's the most modern through things like backwards compatibility. The lovely thing is that we don't have to worry about all that. We just use it for its content storing abilities, which is what it does best, and then let everything else consume it. And this is the way that WordPress goes from 30% of the internet up towards 40, 50 over the next few years. Okay, just some useful slides, white papers, etc. So the very first one is a Gartner article explaining more about the digital experience and where that buzzword comes from. You don't hear it a lot right now, but I think you will over the next couple of years. Just that transition into this more modern, hub-centric, multi-channel way of consuming the internet without having to be stuck at a terminal, computer, or smartphone. We released a Generation Z white paper for the marketers in the room. If you'd like to know more about the demographic trends, I really glossed over just a few of them. But that's a really, really good read that's available for free. Amazon Poly plugin for WordPress. That is a link just to the plugin. One thing that I really like to state is that while it is co-authored between us and Amazon, it is an open source project. Pull requests are welcome. For the non-technical folks, that's just a way for other developers to give suggestions, feedback, and then write code, adding features, etc. So it's something you'd like to be a part of. Always looking for help there. This is a great article on voice search optimizations, machine learning at AWS. They have a really, really great blog. You can also find more about the Amazon Poly project there specifically if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of how it works. That's a great article. And then VR WordPress, that also is an open source project. This will link to the main site where he talks about it, not the one that I showed that was the one used for Content Store. But yeah, follow that. I've been really impressed with his work. And Q&A. Anybody got any questions? Oh, that was question music. Yeah. Sorry.
So going back to one of the Amazon Poly, so if I want to surface for this in this spoken.
Okay, so the Alexa skill side of that, the two gentlemen to your right are the ones that are developing the Alexa skill integration. And then because we've been working together, the natural spoken part of that can be voiced by Polly. So yeah, like if you have something that you wanted to, well, actually, let me make sure that I answered the question. Are you saying like as an input, you want to voice input and then voice publishing?
Yeah, kind of like Alexa.
Alexa, read me my list, yes. Saying, Alexa, write me a blog post and here's the content for it. I have seen proofs of concept for that, but I don't know anything that is productionalized yet. But yeah, you could say, read me my list. That's something that should be a normal possible. Anyone else?
Amazon Body. The MP3.
You have options.
Oh, you have options.
Yeah, so yeah, when the project was first brought to me, that is exactly how it worked. So you do get a copy of the file local to your file system. However, I would not recommend doing that for enterprise grade level sites because streaming is very resource intensive. So if you're trying to stream that out to more than like 100 people or something, you could overload the server and that would be bad news. The solution there is with one click, you can get storage into S3, which is Amazon's storage solution. And then if you need to take that a step further, you can use a CDN, content delivery network, to put that in multiple regions. And that should scale all the way to the moon. Correct. Yeah, no, I don't. The audio doesn't actually start going until you hit play. Sir?
Yeah, piggybacking. So, exports involves. And just
At the moment, we're only working with iTunes. However, I do know, so you're able to submit that same iTunes feed to something called TuneIn Radio. Okay. And the Google Assistant does have a skill for that. So it's not publicized, meaning that like in the admin we have links and like a documentation on how to submit it to iTunes. You won't find that for TuneIn. But if you just search for TuneIn, submit a podcast, you can find information about that, and Google Assistant will be able to. Tom. It is not Ajax, but it does chunk. So it would make a few requests. I don't exactly know where the upper boundary of that is. We've done some pretty long content, but if you were trying to transcribe something like an audiobook, maybe not recommend that. Keep in mind we're on V1. So, but noted, I'll take that back. Okay.
Is it? Can people reach you if they have any other questions? Can they tweet at you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because for newbies, if you're like overwhelmed or anything, there is a huge WordPress community. Someone who was here before asked, could they Google these things? The nice thing about WordPress is there is a big community, and like I said, we have 6,000 members for WPNYC. We'd love to have some of you speak if anyone's available. April 17th, we are looking for a speaker. Yeah, and you can ask me any questions. I'm on the MeetUp group, and then if you have a Twitter account.
Yeah, I'm actually going to just drop my email in here.
And these slides, by the way, I will post them to the Meetup group. Anyone who came in late and didn't check in with the desk, just come see me. I just want to mark you as like attended on here, just because we're trying to crack down on no shows. All right, thanks guys.